Uhuru, Uhuru, and welcome everyone to the Make Wall Street Pay Reparations 2021 National Convention. I am so thrilled, honored, excited to be here with all of you this morning. My name is Ali Aiello, and I'm a member of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement, a proud member at that. And I'm so thrilled and honored to be your MC for the first day of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement National Convention. And it's so exciting to have people from around the world tuning in today. And you can go ahead and write in the chat, tell us where you're tuning in from, and we'll be happy to put that out there and announce so we can recognize all the cities where our members and comrades are and supporters are tuning in from. Um, and so the Uhuru Solidarity Movement, as many of you might already know or maybe don't know, is the mass organization of white people working under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party to build the mass movement for white reparations to African people. And this conference occurs in the period of deepening crisis of imperialism and intensifying resistance of African people, as evidence in the ongoing uprisings in Minneapolis after yet another brutal colonial murder of an African, Dante Wright. And you are here today because, as a white person, you are sickened by the daily colonial murders and violence against African people because you want to see justice for Dante Wright, George Floyd, Mike Brown, Breonna Taylor, Ayanna Jones, and the millions of other Africans whose names we do not know, who suffer under the brutal terror of white colonial domination in Africa, throughout the US, Europe, the Caribbean, and the world. And you are here because you are ready to build the mass movement under the leadership of the African working class to demand that our ruling elites, Wall Street, and capitalists pay reparations. And because you too want to be part of making reparations to African people a reality. And I want to say that we are so honored today to have the world's champion of the reparations struggle and the founder and leader of the Uhuru movement, Chairman Omali Yeshitela, on today as our keynote speaker. So, Uhuru, and welcome, Chairman, as well as Ona Zanea Yeshitela, the deputy chair of the African People's Socialist Party, who will be presenting on her magnificent and groundbreaking work to construct the independent African economy. And it is our honor to have Deputy Chair Onizane Shatella with us here today. So, Uhuru, Deputy Chair. We also want to thank Director Akile Anai and the African People's Socialist Party's Department of Agitation and Propaganda for coordinating the audio visual today in the most professional and organized way. So thank you to Director Akile and Vanguard AV, Uhuru. And we are honored to be joined today by Penny Hess, chair of the African People's Solidarity Committee, who has been in the struggle under the party's leadership for 45 years since the founding of the African People's Solidarity Committee in 1976. So, Uhuru, and welcome, Chairwoman Penny Hess. And I want to salute all of you for being here, for taking that stand, for wanting to learn more about the movement for reparations for African people, and for being a part of this historic 2021 National Convention. So a couple of things announcements I wanted to make before we get started with our program. So please write down your questions and comments because there will be a Q&A throughout the program. We have 2 amazing days ahead of us, and this is not just about consuming information, but it's about taking action and building organization. And in the spirit of taking action, I wanted to let everyone know that we have a goal of raising $20,000 today. $20,000 in reparations for the African People's Socialist Party and the fight for African self-determination at this national convention. So you don't have to wait till our part of the program where we ask you to donate, but you can go ahead and do it right now at uhurusolidarity.org. So go ahead and make your contribution today. And also wanted to plug Uhuru Planet, which is an institution of Black Star Industries that is led under the leadership of the Office of Deputy Chair by the African People's Solidarity Committee. And many of the presenters today will be sporting their Uhuru Planet T-shirt. And I just wanted to show you all of mine. This was my first Uhuru Planet T-shirt. Shows a photo of Chairman Omali Shatella. It's walking propaganda, and the quote in it is it says, if you are concerned with peace, you must fight for it. A real desire for peace is a desire for social justice and reparations. So go ahead and get your Uhuru Planet shirt today. And now we will get started with the program. Oh, I just wanted to announce some of the locations that we have tuning in. Actually, before we get started, it's in the chat, so you can go ahead and check the chat as well. But we've got St. Pete, Florida. We've got Somerville, Massachusetts. We've got Oakland, California. That's where I am as well, in Oakland. Another comrade from Somerville. We have Marseille, France. That's amazing. Dearborn, Michigan. More Oakland, California. Medford, Massachusetts. Spokane. Cicero, Illinois. Minneapolis, Minnesota. San Diego. Portland. Gainesville, Florida. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Burnaby, British Columbia, Gainesville, Florida, more from St. Pete, Philadelphia, Cambridge, Massachusetts, and of course, St. Louis, home of the Black Power Blueprint. So go ahead, continue to write where you're tuning in from. And while you're doing that, now it is my honor to bring our first speaker up for the program, the national chair of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement, who leads the work to build the mass organization of APSC throughout the US and the world. Please join me in welcoming the Uhuru Solidarity Movement National Chair, Jesse Neville. Uhuru, Jesse.
Uhuru, Uhuru, thank you, Ali, and welcome everybody to the Uhuru Solidarity Movement National Convention for 2021. Make Wall Street pay reparations. Welcome, welcome. We're so happy to have everybody here from throughout the country and throughout the world. It's a great honor to open this convention today as the national chair of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement. And I want to begin by saluting. The courageous and brilliant leadership of the worldwide African Revolution, Chairman Omali Shatella, whose relentless and uncompromising struggle for the past half century to build the Black Revolution has made it possible for us as white people to shed our white colonizer worldview and see the world as it really is. It was Chairman Omali Shatella who built the African People's Socialist Party 50 years ago. And 4 years after the founding of the party, the chairman answered the question that had plagued the movement for decades: what to do with the white people. The chairman created the African People's Solidarity Committee, the organization of white people who are organized under the party's leadership to take a principled stand of solidarity with the African Revolution. And we are honored to work under the chairman and the party's leadership, and the leadership provided by Deputy Chair Onezene Yeshitela of the African People's Socialist Party as well, whose work to take the African community beyond protest and towards the capture of real power and self-government is manifesting throughout the world in the emergence of a new economy, an African independent working class economy. The leadership and commitment to the people that Deputy Chair embodies is deeply inspirational. So we salute the leadership of the party, and specifically, I want to salute the Secretary General of the African Socialist International, Loezi Kinshasa, the chairman of the African People's Socialist Party in occupied Azania, Tafari Mugeri, the Western Regional Representative for the party, Bakari Olatunji, the National Director of Organization, Chimaranga Salambao, the Director of Agitation and Propaganda, Akile Anai, the Midwest Regional Representative for the party, Malika Ngweji Bukechi, the director of the All African Peoples Development and Empowerment Project, Dr. Aisha Fields, the president of the African National Women's Organization, Yejide Orinmila, the president of the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement, Kalambai Andanette, the regional representative for the southern region of the party, Kobina Bantushengo, who all comprise the Central Committee of the African People's Socialist Party under the chairman's leadership, and all of whom we will have the tremendous honor of hearing from over the next few days. So we salute the leadership of this movement, and we salute the entire membership of the African People's Socialist Party, to every single member of this vanguard party that stretches from the colonially impoverished and oppressed neighborhoods of North St. Louis to the townships of South Africa or occupied Azania. I also want to express my deepest revolutionary appreciation and salutes to my leadership in the African People's Solidarity Committee, Penny Hess. Penny Hess, Chairwoman Penny, has worked under the chairman and the party's leadership since the founding of APSC in 1976 to build the solidarity movement. And Chairwoman Penny, as we all know, brings daily leadership to USM on how to move strategically, how to convey the political line of African internationalism to the white population in the most effective way possible. So we salute Chairwoman Penny for representing now for decades the highest and most principled stand of white solidarity with Black power, to which all USM and APSC members, including myself, strive to emulate. And finally, we salute and we honor the African people who are fighting right now as we speak on the front lines, whether in Haiti, Brazil, Congo, the Bahamas, or right in Minneapolis or Chicago, where a new wave of uprisings is sending tremors throughout the US social system after yet another brutal colonial murder of an African man, this time named Dante Wright, and a 13-year-old named Adam Toledo in Chicago, names which will be added to the endless scroll of names of lives stolen by imperialism. In the midst of the period of African resistance that is continuing to unravel in this country, we are humbled as white people who sit on the pedestal of slavery and colonialism to heed the call that the African Revolution has made to us. The party has made the call to us as white people. Go beyond the empty slogans and meaningless gestures that have come to characterize the white response to systematic Black death. Go beyond the subjective response, the one that keeps us locked into what Chairman Omali Yeshitela calls the Sisyphean task of unlearning our racism. This is a call for white people to join the rest of humanity, join the African, join the Mexican, join the indigenous, join the Arab, join the colonized peoples of the world who are fighting, not for white people to like them, but for power over their lives, power which can only be realized when colonialism is destroyed. And therefore, this is a call for us white people, the colonizers, the settlers, the oppressors, the gentrifiers, to take a stand against colonialism. We have a job, white people. We have a role to play. We have an assignment. Go into the white community and boldly, without hesitation, organize the movement for reparations to African people as an anti-colonial stand. Reparations is our mission. It is not a favor. It is not an act of charity. It is not a philanthropic investment. It is the return of that which has been stolen. It is unity with a revolutionary demand, and itself is a revolutionary act. Reparations, as the chairman says, means repair the damage, and African people will decide what that looks like. Our job is to go back into the white community and unleash the resources hoarded in our communities, return them to the African struggle for liberation and self-determination. Only then can the damage be repaired. Only then can the world be healed, including the damage that we white people, colonizers, have caused to the planet Earth itself. And yes, including even the damage we have caused to each other in a culture built on domination and rape. When we do this, we leave behind the loneliness of life on the pedestal. We enter into a challenging but honest and principled, beautiful and hopeful relationship with the rest of humanity. This is the pathway to the future of genuine peace between human beings and the restoration of all life on the planet Earth. But we can't do this as individuals. There is no personal solution to colonialism. We must get organized. We have to become members of USM if you're not a member. But if you are a member, and once you become a member, we have to build the regional strategy of the African People's Socialist Party. We have to build real branches of USM in cities across the world. We have members in 148 cities, and that's great, but that's not good enough, because what the party is calling on us to do is to build 148 branches in 148 cities and beyond. We have to get organized. As defined by the party and the chairman, our job as USM, as the strategy of the African People's Socialist Party, is to fracture the white colonizer unity with our own ruling class, create a reparations uprising in the white community, foment class struggle in the white world directed against the colonial, parasitic, capitalist ruling class. And there's only one way to do that: organization, organization, organization under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party. We must get organized. Only then, when we are organized, can we build the collective capacity to turn our backs on the white ruling class, to cause a mass desertion from the reserve army of white complicity that the wealthy Wall Street elites have assumed the right to plunder the world's resources in our name and in our presumed benefit. Our rallying cry is organization. Our commitment is reparations. Our theory is African internationalism. Our leadership is Chairman Omali Yeshitela and the African People's Socialist Party. So in today's conference, we will have the honor to hear directly from the leadership of the party. We will be holding a workshop on how to build the campaign to make Wall Street pay reparations, to do what Chairman Omali Yeshitela calls expropriate the expropriators, haunt the bourgeoisie with the reparations demand. We are going to be discussing later today our plan to intensify our political action campaign to chase the bourgeoisie into their nightmares through a bold strategy that includes demonstrations at the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and the Federal Reserve. Everything we do is tied to an actual goal to capture resources. That is the essence of who we are as USM. That is the meaning of solidarity. And our goal for this year is to raise over $250,000 from the campaign that we are calling the Reparations Legacy Project, a new campaign of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement formed to organize wealthy white people to pay reparations directly into the African self-determination programs of the Uhuru movement, like the Black Power Blueprint. We are committed to increase this goal to $1 million within the next 3 years, because this is not the time for incremental increase. We are determined to keep up with the blistering pace of the rise of the African People's Socialist Party, which means we gotta escalate our work to unleash this stolen wealth. We gotta escalate our work to build our membership to 1,000 members by the end of this year. And we will have a workshop tomorrow to discuss the strategy for making that happen. And here's a sneak preview. It is not going to happen without organization. With organization, we can blow past that goal and be on our way to hundreds of thousands of solidarity members worldwide in no time. We will build branches in every region of the US and beyond, in France, the UK, other parts of Europe, and in occupied Azania or South Africa. So I want to close by saying that under the leadership of the African working class, the people's war is raging, comrades. On the one side is the African working class and the colonized workers of the world. On the other side is the parasitic colonial capitalist white ruling class and capitalism itself. On the one side is the future, the possibility for humanity itself to be reborn in the image of a liberated Africa. On the other side is doom, death, and destruction. You know which side you're on. You're on the side of the future. You're on the side of the winning team. You're on the side of the African Revolution. That's why you came here today. And I'm glad you did, because we have work to do, comrades. The party is winning. and we will win. So let's have a great convention, and let's come out of this weekend energized, galvanized, and ready to hit the ground running and do the work to make Wall Street pay reparations now. Uhuru.
Uhuru. Uhuru, Chair Jesse. Gotta give that a round of applause and really salute that powerful presentation, Jesse. And just really want to salute your leadership as the chair of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement over the last year. So Uhuru, Chair Jesse. And I want to announce some more people where people are tuning in from. We have comrades in Seattle, in Portland, in Washington D.C., and in San Diego. So want to give a shout out to those comrades as well. So now I would like to bring up Alikia Ngoma, a member of the African People's Socialist Party and the office of the chairman, who wrote and performed a brilliant African nation fight song. Alikia will be introducing this song, and we will be hearing the song today. So Uhuru, and welcome, Alikia.
Uhuru, thank you, Comrade Ali, for that introduction. My name is Alikia Ngoma, and I'm a member of the African People's Socialist Party. Before I begin, I want to salute my leadership, Chairman Omali Ishatella, under whose leadership the African Nation Fight song was written, as well as the political direction as far as text from Louise Kinshasa, who is the Secretary General of the African Socialist International. And so the African Nation Fight song is a song that speaks to not only the resistance of African people, but the unity of African people as one nation. It raises up our past revolutionary leaders like Marcus Garvey, Malcolm X, Patrice Lumumba, Fannie Lou Hamer. It also raises Jean-Jacques Dessalines, who led the African Revolution of Haiti, or Haiti, and a slogan that he introduced to the revolution, which is the times that we are in right now. It says, "Coupe tête, boule kai," which means cut heads, burn houses. It raises up the red, black, and green as the national flag of African people. It talks about the need for African workers to unite and fight to overthrow parasitic capitalism. And it says all of these things in a very simple form, that way that anybody who's hearing this can understand what's being said and also understand the theory of African internationalism at the same time. And so what's going to be on your screens is a demo version of this song. And this version of the instrumental, it actually bounces between various African genres of music to show how they can work together, and that even, through our culture and through our artistic expressions, that we are one. So it's going to be on your screens with the lyrics and the melody, so you can familiarize yourself with it. And if you already know it, you can sing along to it. Uhuru. billion strong, yes, we are one. We are winning. Viva Haiti, who first set us free. We are winning. Carry the torch of Jean-Jacques Dessalines. We are winning. Coup peut-être, vous les cailles. We are winning. We will rejoice when the colonizers die. They die. We are winning. Long live the liberation of our African nation. Freedom through organization. Socialist world, our creation. 1 billion strong, yes, we are one. We are winning. Fight like Fannie Lou and Malcolm too. We are winning. Remember our struggle, always be true. We are winning. From Harlem to Brazil to Azania, we are winning. We fight and live for a free Africa. We are winning. Long live the liberation of our African nation. Freedom through organization. Socialist world, our creation. 1 billion strong, yes, we are one. We are winning. Patrice Lumumba's life won't be in vain. We are winning. Keep up the work in Marcus Garvey's name. We are winning. Independent and free is what we will be. We are winning. Africa will bask in our victory. We are winning. Long live the liberation of our African nation. Freedom through organization. Socialist world, our creation. 1 billion strong, yes, we are one. We are
Uhuru. Uhuru, thank you, Alikia, for that amazing and inspiring African Nation fight song. It's a great song. That song says it all. It really does. So really, really appreciate that. Have everyone dancing the whole day. So now it is my honor. Oh, actually, before I bring up our next presenter, I want to also mention that we have comrades tuning in from South Africa, from Malta, and from Kuwait. So, welcome to our international comrades, and continue to write where you're tuning in from in the chat. Okay, so now it is my honor to introduce to the floor Penny Hess. Penny Hess is the chairwoman of the African People's Solidarity Committee and has worked under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party to build principled white solidarity with African liberation for 45 years, since the founding of the African People's Solidarity Committee in 1976. In 2000, she published Overturning the Culture of Violence, which documents the historic white violence against African people and raises the demand for reparations. Chairwoman Penny has spoken around the world to organize white people into the movement for reparations to African people and is a leading force in the campaign to make Wall Street pay reparations. So Uhuru and welcome, Chairwoman Penny Hess.
Uhuru, Uhuru, everybody. Thank you, Ali. Just really want to salute Alikia and that incredible fight song of the African People's Socialist Party. I want to salute Chair USM, Uhuru Solidarity Movement Chair Jesse Neville for that powerful presentation. And to say again, what an honor it is to be here today and to have you to be here under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party, to be on the winning side. I want to join the salute made by Chair Jesse, saluting Chairman Omalia Shatella, our leader, Deputy Chair Ona Zenea Shatella, Secretary General Luwezi Kinshasa, born in Congo and organizing on the continent of Europe and in Africa, Chair Tafari Mugeri, organizing in occupied Azania, in Gauteng province, organizing the state of Azania as well as the continent of Africa, and President Kalambai and Tacharwa, who will be on today, who have been incredible, ran an incredible campaign building the social movement here in St. Louis, Director Akile, National Director of Organization Chimurenga, and all the members of the National Central Committee of the party. I salute you, and I think that, you know, I want to state that it is incredibly important that we acknowledge our leadership and that people can see that the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party are real people who make it happen, who put it on the ground, who are in the heart of the African working class, building, organizing, summing up under the leadership of Chairman Omalia Shatella. And to say that as members of the African People's Solidarity Committee, that we work under the leadership of the Office of Deputy Chair Ona Zenea Shatella, who has built the Black Power Blueprint and the more than 50 institutions for self-determination of the African People's Socialist Party. And that everything that you want to know about what the Uhuru movement, the African People's Socialist Party, stands for is right there on the pages of the Burning Spear newspaper that is edited by Director Akile Anai, and it's out every month, you know, out there for the people to see, and the reflections, both politically and organizationally, of this incredible worldwide movement. So we welcome you coming from the white community to be here in a movement that is led by the fierce bias on the side of the African working class, the leadership of the African working class. And from the Uhuru Solidarity Movement and the African People's Solidarity Committee, which I have the honor of being the chair, we are white people under the direct leadership of the African People's Socialist Party. Everything that we do, all of our work is accountable to the National Central Committee of the party. And we want to be able to show you and have, and continue to build a movement of white people who can begin to see the world through the eyes of the African working class. We want to challenge all the ideas that any of us may have had or still have in our brains that come from this system of colonialism and parasitic capitalism, white power that has elevated us to the role of the colonizer at the expense of the people on the planet Earth. We want to win, and we want to show you today, and we will, and Chairman Omalia Shatella is going to be speaking right after me, that we can understand the world through African internationalism, to see that the critical key question in the whole world today is the question of colonialism. And that is what is being brought to the surface everywhere we are, based on the incredible resistance of African people, of oppressed people around the world, and based on the political and organizational leadership of Chairman Omali Yeshitela and the African People's Socialist Party. So we can get to the way things are and understanding how things got to be the way they are, and what it will take for the world and for us to be part of a future under the leadership of African people, under the leadership of the colonized, fighting for power and national liberation over their lives, and to be able to abandon our allegiance and our relationship to this white ruling class that is the enemy of the people on the planet Earth. And this is a time of resistance, as Chairman Omali Yeshitela has shown us. This is a time when white people are being called to task, to stand up, to take responsibility, to pay reparations, to stop laying in the cut, to stop our complicity with this system and our ability to carry out the will of the colonial state with impunity, that we have to recognize our history and we have to take it on by rectifying our stand. So this is a call and an opportunity for white people to be something more than just another indebted white people looking to make it in the system. This is because this is a time of crisis in this social system, and we have seen, and we do see, the continuous ongoing police and colonial violence against African people, the police murders, and all the other ways that there are two Americas, that there are two relationships to this state experienced in this country, one at the expense of the other. And that we want to talk about what it is that distinguishes the Uhuru movement and the Uhuru solidarity movement from everything else. And so I want to say that the African People's Solidarity Committee was formed by Chairman Omali Yeshitela in 1976. Yes, almost 45 years ago, as part of the process of the party of carrying out a multifaceted strategy to win the total liberation of Africa and African people, regardless of what it takes, to say that African people will be free and self-governing again. And again, the African People's Socialist Party represents the interests of the African working class, whether in North St. Louis, whether in Chicago, or whether in the continent of Africa itself, the Caribbean, forced into Europe, or any other place where African workers have been forced out through this vicious colonial system. And in 1960s, the movement for Black power erupted inside the US, and it was part of a worldwide struggle of African and oppressed people for national liberation around the world. As we know, Cuba was winning, Vietnam was winning, defeating US colonialism all throughout the continent of Africa. African people were fighting against the colonial domination that had oppressed and built the world system of capitalism, and that inside the borders of the United States, inside the belly of the beast, the center of world imperialism, we see this incredible movement led by the African working class that also galvanized all other oppressed indigenous and colonized peoples inside this border to stand up against US imperialism, and that the US government itself recognized that this struggle, as the chairman has shown us, was the greatest internal threat to the US government since ever. And that in 1966, Chairman Omali Yeshitela was a member of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee in St. Petersburg, Florida. He tore down this incredibly vicious colonial mural depicting African people in hideous caricature that had hung in City Hall for 30 years, right visible to everybody who came in to see it. The chairman, as part of a movement as a part of a movement of the uprising of young African people in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, went into City Hall, tore down that mural. The chairman was sentenced to 5 years in prison and spent the next many years in and out of prison based on that sentence and also his organizing in African communities throughout Florida and throughout the South in particular. And that 50 years before a mass movement, as we see it today, demanded that colonial statues and other representatives of colonial power in this country be torn down. The chairman had already torn down that mural. And of course, the city of St. Petersburg has never apologized that, never often offered reparations, but that was a critical act of the Black Power movement, the first act of the Black Power movement of the 1960s that galvanized the struggle for power led by the African working class. And the chairman, by 1970, Chairman Omali Yeshitela had summed up, it's not enough to protest, that African people had to seize power, that he was determined to take the slogan popularized in the 1960s of the Black Power and to make that a reality in which African people struggle for power over their lives. And that was the only answer, because otherwise Chairman Omali Yeshitela would be facing today, when the conditions of African people in many ways are worse than they were in the 1960s. And the chairman was forced to sum up what the questions were, what were the critical questions that the movement had to understand, and that we have to understand, that it was the assault on Africa, the theft of African human beings, turning African people into commodities, into things with price tags on them, to machines, to a means of production, to labor, turning humanity from Africa into commodities and that produce the monetary value for white people who can act as the state to maintain white power. And that it was this assault on Africa, the theft of Africa's resources, the theft of African human beings, the enslavement of African people on stolen land of the indigenous people, where genocide had been perpetrated against them as a mass popular campaign of the general white population. This is what built the wealth. This is what transformed, as the chairman has shown us, Europe from feudalism into capitalism. This is the birth of capitalism. This isn't a bad thing that capitalism did. This was the essence of capitalism. And on the heels of the assault on Africa, the genocide against the indigenous people, basically the colonization of the entire world that made Europe and white people the richest, most powerful system on this planet for the last 500 or 600 years. So capitalism was born parasitic. The fact that there is desperate poverty among African people, among oppressed and colonized peoples around the world, and prosperity and opportunity and democratic rights and social wealth for white people is a dialectic, as the chairman says, an inescapable dialectic between white people and the rest of the world. And this is the critical question. The chairman defined colonialism. He said the problem is not racism. You don't fight the symptoms. White people are the colonizers. Colonialism means the occupation of a whole people by a foreign and alien state power for profit. That it happens as much as US and British colonialism, French colonialism around the world as it does inside the borders of the United States. And if we don't see the ongoing colonial police murders of African people for what it is, we are missing the central contradiction. But this movement, led by the African People's Socialist Party, forces us to confront the world as it is and what it will take to change it. So we are the damn colonizers. We are the colonizer nation. This is the basis when people say white privilege or racism. This is the basis for these ideas. This is the material and organizational understanding, the reality, the material reality behind these ideas in our heads. Chairman Omali Yeshitela has shown us that, and shown us that we as white people can understand this and can begin to take responsibility for it. And that we have to look at what we have carried out as the colonizer nation, that we have perpetrated unspeakable violence against the African population over and over and over again through the decades of the lynching, the terror, the burning of whole towns. Any time that African people accumulated wealth, accumulated any kind of self-determination, it was attacked and overturned, not just by the state, but by regular white people carrying out the violence of the state with impunity, never brought to trial for that, always by persons unknown. And the chairman has defined the assassinations and the destruction of the movement in the 1960s as a counterinsurgency, the war without terms, that the US imperialism and world imperial and European imperialism carry out against all oppressed and colonized people who rise up in their struggle and their movement to be free and to be liberated, such as the US war against Vietnam, the French this war against the people of Algeria, and that inside the borders of the United States, there was also a counterinsurgency that destroyed the organization, that assassinated the leaders, that imprisoned African people, and that the chairman has defined the question of reparations as a revolutionary demand, not as an issue being voted on by the Congress, although it's good that these questions are out there so that it's on the table. But this, in 1982, the African People's Socialist Party held the first tribunal on reparations to African people, using international law to indict the US government for genocide against African people, for the colonizing of African people, and for the right of African people's struggle for power over their lives to be heard on the world court, with the resolution, the conclusion from that tribunal that the United States government owed in 1982 $4.1 trillion in stolen labor alone inside the borders of the United States. So when we understand that capitalism and the colonization and domination of the majority of humanity, beginning with the African population inside this country and around the world, we can see that everything is owed, that it is a revolutionary demand, and that we have a job in the African People's Solidarity Committee. We have an assignment to, as the chairman says, to go behind enemy lines, to win our families, our friends, to go inside the white population as the voice of Black power in white face, to bring and extend the African revolution into the belly of the beast. This is our job, to unleash those stolen resources, to be able to take responsibility for who we are and show other white people that our truest interest is in genuine solidarity with African people and the people on the planet Earth. Because as Chairman Omali Yeshitela describes it, the African Revolution is about the liberation of all oppressed and colonized peoples. We have a choice. We have a choice. We have the ability to stand with the oppressor or to turn loose our whiteness and to pay reparations. Paying reparations is not, it's not a punishment. It's our redemption. It's our ability to make our self-criticism to African people, enjoying the humanity of the entire earth, and to be part of the whole struggle that is going to rid this world of this vicious, violent, white power capitalist parasitic system and build a world in which all human beings can live, no one at the expense of everyone else. We have a responsibility to make our ruling class pay reparations, and that in this world, again, we can rectify our relationship to African people, we can end our self-imposed isolation from the rest of the world, and we can find our redemption under the leadership of the African Revolution. We can do this. Let's build this movement for reparations to African people. Let's go out there. We already have members in nearly 150 cities. We need to be all over. This year, we're going to be building on the continent of Europe and Africa in terms of white people taking this stand under the leadership of the African Revolution. We can do this. We can join humanity forward side in genuine solidarity with Reparations. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairwoman Penny, Uhuru, unity through reparations, Uhuru, Uhuru, Uhuru. I just want to give a round of applause for that powerful, powerful, powerful presentation, and just want to really unite with what you said, Chairwoman Penny, that, you know, reparations is our redemption as white people. It's not a punishment. This is our redemption as a colonizer nation to pay reparations and join the rest of humanity. I just really unite with that, and that should be a call to action to all white people on this conference, to take a stand for reparations. So I just really appreciate that. And you know what you said, everything is owed to African people. Yes, fighting for this stance for white people for over 40 years under the leadership of Chairman Omali Yeshitela and the African People's Socialist Party. So Uhuru, Chairwoman Penny Hess. And the program, it's wow, this is jam-packed. We've got an exciting next speaker. But before I bring on our exciting next speaker, I just want to say we have comrades who told us that they're tuning in from Tacoma, Washington. We've got Boston, Massachusetts, Calgary, Canada, and Central Florida. So great places where people are tuning in from. And just want to say, if you want to take a stand of reparations, pay reparations today after hearing those two mobilizing speeches, you can go ahead and do that. Contribute to the work of the African People's Socialist Party, the self-determination institutions, contribute to the African Revolution. You can do that by paying reparations today at uhurusolidarity.org. And there's a really nice red button that says pay reparations, where you can go and contribute to our $20,000 goal today. So just wanted to give that pitch. And now it is my profound honor to bring on our keynote speaker and our leadership, the founder and leader of the African People's Socialist Party and the Uhuru movement. He is the author of many works laying out the theory of African internationalism and the inevitable victory of the African Revolution. Two of his most recent works being Vanguard, the Advanced Detachment of the African Revolution, and An Uneasy Equilibrium, the African Revolution versus Parasitic Capitalism. The chairman's theory of African internationalism defines the work that we are engaged in today and is the basis for the campaign to go after the white ruling class and make Wall Street pay reparations. So please welcome the leader of the African Revolution, Chairman Omali Yeshitela. Uhuru, Chairman.
Uhuru, Comrade Ali, thank you very much for that introduction. I'd like to also express my appreciation to Comrade Jesse Neville, who is chair of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement, and of course to Comrade Chairwoman Penny Hess of the African People Solidarity Committee, and to all of you who have taken on this responsibility of building this very important convention at this very important moment in history. I also want to acknowledge the presence of other portions or other forces from our party from around the world, those who are in Africa in particular, and throughout the Americas, within the United States and throughout the Americas, within the United States, and also in Europe. So thank you so much for being here. And I just want to say that the existence and presence of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement and the African People Solidarity Committee always important, always significant. But right now, there is an exclamation point put to your importance and significance of this growing and obvious crisis of a social system that, among other things, is fraying from every part of itself, and a social system that is reeling from the responses of the oppressed peoples, the colonized peoples of the world and within the United States, and particularly right now in the United States, where this conference is occurring, where this convention is occurring. We've just seen the murder within the last few days of a 13-year-old child in Chicago, Illinois, and we've heard the innocuous and dishonest, historically based dishonest explanations given for that murder of that child. We've experienced, and this child murdered at the hands of a military force, a domestic military force called police. It's a colonial power in Chicago that in this instance kills a 13-year-old child. And that is notorious for having killed so many other people, Africans included, that has established a secret prison where Africans are tortured on a regular basis, confessions forced from them, where there have been police, these military forces that have been exposed for history of torture, an ongoing practice of torture. We've seen this happening in Chicago just in the last few days. And then also, of course, within the last few days, we've seen the murder of a 20-year-old African in Brooklyn Center, Minnesota, young Dante Wright. And then, of course, this is happening during the time where another domestic military force, occupying military force in our community is on trial in a domestic military court for having murdered an African man by crushing the life out of him over a 9-minute period of time, where peoples around the world have had an opportunity to see this murder, to experience this murder, and to experience the testimony that is coming from people who witnessed the murder or who are in the process now of trying to exonerate the colonial state apparatus for having committed this offense against our people. We mentioned this in terms of its significance in the United States, but the truth of the matter is that we are talking about something that is occurring by a system that came into existence through carnage across the globe that is killing 13 and 10-year-old and children all around the world on a regular basis. That's murdering people in even more grotesque fashion than what we've seen with George Floyd. Not only are they murdering people in more grotesque fashion inside the United States, but around the world. It is a social system that came into existence in this fashion. And this is really important for us to understand, that it is a social system that cannot sustain itself, that cannot live without this kind of grotesque brutality imposed on Africans and others around the world. And that's why your presence here is so important. And this is also what gives significance to the question of reparations and why we would be talking about reparations, not only to reparations from Wall Street, but your participation as members of Uhuru Solidarity Movement and members of the African People's Solidarity Committee in raising reparations from yourselves, from your families, from your neighbors, from other white people or colonizers, if you will, to raise this reparation, because it's the only way that actual class struggle can be initiated by those of you who are increasingly coming to understand that there's something horribly wrong with the capitalist social system. And that, and many of you who are coming to understand that the capitalist system itself must be overturned. And that the capitalist social system is the originator of class struggle and class issues as we've come to understand it since the advent of colonialism. And so how do you fight against capitalist class? How do you engage in class struggle? This is a critical question that we are confronted with, and our approach to this has to be scientific. And that's what the party has contributed to, bringing this scientific approach to the struggle against capitalism in the real world, class struggle. Because we've said all along that class struggle is concentrated in the colonial question, and that when that is not understood, and when we have the colonizers engaged in what they characterize as class struggle, generally what we are looking at is just competition between different sectors of the colonizer population, the colonizer nation, for a greater share or redistribution of the resources that come into the colonizer population as a consequence of colonialism, as a consequence of the colonial domination of Africans and other peoples around the world. So we're saying that the real class struggle is concentrated in the colonial structure, in the colonial question. And this is why you are so important. This is why this whole issue of reparations is so important. The Uhuru Solidarity Movement, the African People's Solidarity Committee, and this issue of class struggle, it must be understood correctly. And the party has been providing the leadership of how we understand this question. We have concluded some time ago that there is a way to understand society, that we don't have to be trapped by superstition, by some assumption of great heroes being responsible for how society looks, and by the issues of bogus issues of morality as being the defining factors of what society would look like and how it would look and what should inform our struggle. We're looking right now at a time of severe crisis in this social system. And part of what we're looking at is concentrated in the United States at this moment, because the United States has been the global hegemon for such a long, long period of time. But as I mentioned earlier, the murder, the oppression, the exploitation, the expropriation of value, the terror that's being waged against the peoples of the world is happening everywhere. But all of that is concentrated in the United States, because the United States has been the global hegemon for the longest period of time. So we want to understand this, and we want to take a scientific approach to understanding this. And by scientific, we mean the same approach that utilizes a scientific method. You make an observation, you begin to ask the question of what is responsible for what it is that I'm looking at. You initiate experiments and things like that to determine whether this hypothesis that you're putting forward has any validity. You do that in real life. And what the party has done has been on a very scientific method. We haven't said that we want to investigate our situation in the world by going to the Bible, going to any other kind of religious instrument or anything like that. We haven't said, let's understand what is happening in the world by the expressions of this reality that's coming from great leaders or anything else. We have examined the actual reality that we are confronted with in the world. We want to understand the world. We examine the world. And that's what we've been forced to do. We didn't start off wanting to do this, but we were engaged in practice of trying to solve these problems that were murdering African people, having to ask and answer the question of why is it that everywhere we look on the planet Earth, we find people who look like African people all over the world, who are living in abject misery, poverty, forced ignorance, violence all the time. Why is it that every place we look, not only is that true of Africans, but other people who are not white? And of course, we've come to understand that the reason is that the vast majority of the peoples around the world suffer from colonialism. And the colonizer has been self-described as white, as someone who has come from Europe and has taken over the lives and resources of the vast majority of the peoples. This foreign and alien entity that prior to the advent of colonial slavery was fighting for its life against disease and oppression, internal oppression, within a system that has now that we now know as feudalism, a system that was defined by relations of production that had, on the one hand, the landlords, the nobility, people who owned the land, extracting tremendous amount of value for people who were stuck on that land as peasants and as serfs, who produced, tried to eke out a living for themselves, but most of what they were earning went to this group of landlords, this group of nobility, etc. And this was the relations of production that they experienced. But those relations of production did not suffer, did not provide a way for that whole society to move forward. The fact that they had a system that relied on stealing and raping the toilers, who was peasants and serfs, had several consequences in terms of actual development and production capacity. And so ultimately what happened was that these group of people who've been given these noble characterizations as explorers, who were curing their intellectual itch by going out into the world to see what was on the other side, were bandits and pirates and thieves and thugs. And they were the initiators in stealing the resources of Africa. That included African people ourselves. They were the forces who initiated the process of committing genocide against indigenous peoples in the Americas, in Australia, in similar situations. They initiated the war on China that resulted in China being turned into a nation of junkies. This war that was called the Opium War that was led by England. They initiated the process of turning Vietnam into a country of junkies. So throughout the Americas, genocide. Throughout the Americas, the forced transportation, dispersal of African people from Africa, where this massive assault was made. Not only one that resulted in the theft of a whole continent of people, not only one that resulted in the theft of a continent of people that is so rich in natural resources that this extraction of value, forced extraction of value, is occurring up to this day. But a system that was responsible, a system born of this, that transferred tremendous amounts of wealth and value into a diseased and starving Europe, that transformed Europe, that created this extraordinary escalation of production inside Europe that was coming as a consequence of what was taken from Africa, from the Americas and other places. We had to find out why it was that every place we looked, we were poor. And Europe, and what we now know as America, was rich. And what we now know as America is a consequence of Europe stretching out to achieve, to create value at the expense of the indigenous people here. There is a direct relationship to the genocide, the impoverishment, the fact that there's a population living in concentration camps called Indian reservations in this country today who don't even get mentioned most of the time. This is a part of the process. This is a part of the carnage that was spread throughout the world, the globe, in creating the social system that we are responding to today. That's responsible for your being here. That's responsible for an assessment of what it was that gave birth to this, coming from the African People's Socialist Party. The science of society, looking at the science of society, using tools, some of these tools created by Karl Marx when he talks about the historical materialism, that science, that society can be understood. There's no mystery. We don't have to go and see what scripture that was responsible for what we are living with. We can find out what is responsible by examining this world. That's a materialist investigation of the world. Materialism. Somebody, some human beings advanced on the rest of the humanity in a way that is responsible for the destruction, for the assault on the planet itself, recognizing that human beings ourselves were essential factors, features of the ecology of the world. And when you have this sector of the population that attacks the earth, that attacks huge sectors of the population, taking us into forced bondage, into colonial slavery, and then creating value and wealth for yourselves in that process, that is what we investigated and we've come to understand. Karl Marx once talked about how capitalism came into being. He talked about some assumption that at one juncture, the whole human family, he said human family, but if you read him enough and understand the circumstances under which he wrote and lived, you understand when he says human, he means Europe. He means white. He doesn't say white, he means Europe. And sometimes, but that's exactly what it is he means. And he talked about the development of the human society coming first, beginning and moving in this very vertical fashion from what he referred to as primitive communism, primitive communalism, a time when there was no exploitation, no oppression. There was equality with everybody, and that there was no oppression of women. And then this process begins, he said, to move from this primitive communism to slavery. And he said slavery came about because of scarcity. And because this is how economy in economics was defined in Europe for the longest period of time, the study of scarcity. But it was the study of scarcity in Europe. And this scarcity is what informed the consciousness and the culture of Europe, a material basis for it. A material basis, not genetics, a material basis for it. And this scarcity is what thrust Europe out into the world and initiate this process of colonialism. And so it was going out into the world in this fashion. It was this what he referred to as this slavery, and then and scarcity as he characterized it. He's not talking about the enslavement of African people. He's talking about slavery that happened in Europe. What we have come to know is Europe. Got to remember that Europe is a new creation. Even the concept of Europe and Europeans is a new creation. And that moving from this in terms of the discussion of the development of human society, he says that from slavery, then there was this movement toward what he called feudalism that I talked about a moment ago. And Europe lived under feudal domination for nearly 1,000 years. Extreme poverty, where literally there were sections of Europe where people were literally clothless, naked to the elements, and bogged down and mired in superstition with the assumption of the divine right of kings, and the people had no rights at all. And then what took Europe from this situation of poverty and destitution and a total absence of freedom? What took Europe from that place? What changed Europe from being a society, a group of people based primarily on an understanding of the divine right of kings? This kind of superstition that there is the king, that God gave the king all these rights. You don't need any other rights, that the king has been bestowed by God. Become the custodians of the rights of the people. This is a philosophy that has its origin in the material base of the kind of the mode of production that we know as feudalism, that lasted for a very long time and has left this imprint on Europe even today. And then, of course, what Marx said was that following from feudalism came capitalism. And in the mode of production of capitalism have relations of production revolving around this profound contradiction of the private ownership of what is necessary to produce, and production that comes as a consequence of socialized production. People producing everything but it's owned privately. This is the mode of production of capitalism. And then he said the Marx theory goes from there, then you go to communism. And you get to communism as a consequence and this communism is not primitive communism. This is a communism that comes about as a consequence of the development of the capitalist system that came into existence another way. And how did it come into existence? Marx said that capitalism came into existence through this massive amount of capital that didn't come about through capitalist production, but was the starting point of the entire thing. And he defined that as having in political theory, in political economy, the same significance as theology, as original sin in theology, the starting point of it all. And he said, how did it start? He said it started by turning Africa into a warren for the commercial hunting of black skins. He gave other examples of that. He talked about how England made a war against China. He didn't talk about how US was primitive accumulation, what we now call America. He did talk about what happened with the indigenous people who were interred in the mines of the Americas, etc. But the US itself, what we experiencing was a part of that, what he called primitive accumulation. But what then is primitive accumulation? Primitive accumulation is foreign and alien domination of a people for the purpose of extracting their value and controlling them in the world politically. So what Marx called primitive accumulation as being the root, as being the basis, as being the foundation of capitalism, we say colonialism is what he's talking about, because that's what we are experiencing. And while primitive accumulation was something that was used by Marx and social scientists at the time to describe the development of Europe, what he has done is objectify the experience of Africans and other peoples around the world by defining us simply as forces and people and human beings who are being raped and pillaged as something that exists purely for the benefit of the development of Europe, white power, white people, etc., of what it is that we're experiencing in the world today. That's why Adam Toledo was killed in Chicago. That's why we have people who are being murdered all over the continent of Africa and throughout the Americas, et cetera, to sustain this social system. And that's why we've always said that it is a social system that's doomed to perish, because it is one that is built on a fault line of oppression of peoples around the world. That's why your presence here is so important, because you have advantage of science. It's African internationalism that took us to this understanding. And this is something that informs everything that we're doing. So right now we have forces who are in Minneapolis, Minnesota, who are in Brooklyn Center, Minnesota. These are evangelists. These are forces like you who have the responsibility. The people didn't necessarily need us to organize demonstrations, though we do it. And we do it because it enhances the ability of the people to fight, to resist. But obviously they need us to organize demonstrations, either in Minneapolis or in Brooklyn Center or in Ferguson, where we also have a presence. And in the 148 cities where the Uhuru Solidarity Movement is existing. The people don't need us just to organize protests, even though protest is important, which is why we are saying, make Wall Street pay reparations. We're using protests as a means to do that in some instances. But the people need science to give leadership to the protests. The people need our intervention in the actions, the mass actions of the people, in the struggles of the people, to take these struggles beyond dealing with symptoms of the contradiction and to take them away from the normal kind of philosophy, the ideology that's born from the system we live in. We have a particular view of the world based on the fact that we live in a system that's based on slavery and colonialism. A system based on slavery and colonialism, just like any other mode of production, and that's what we're talking about. We say in the party that colonialism was a mode of production, that Marx talked about all these other things, but he talked about what happened to us as simply a force that was an auxiliary, something that contributed to the development of Europe. No. What you're looking at with colonialism is a mode of production. And with the activism stringing from colonialism, then we are looking at the concept of nations also being created. And as we know it today, and borders and the nations are created and defined by whom? By the basic power of the world. And capitalism was born as a world system, as a global system, just because colonialism was something that happened globally. It was a part of the empire of Europe, empires of Europe going out and capturing the rest of the world. That's why we say when people talk about imperialism, and it stems from the word empire, imperialism was started with the attack on Africa and the rest of us around the world. So here you have this situation that's being created. And so now the consciousness of the peoples of the world are affected by this as well. So at one time it was Germany. There might have been, in this preceded the existence of what we now know as Germany. But we have these groups of white people, sometimes like warring tribes of white people throughout Europe, who are now being consolidated around economic interests and development happening in Europe and other places around the world as a consequence of this extraction of value from Africa and other places. And in this process then is defined these entities that we refer to, well, actually state apparatuses, state being, of course, the bureaucracy and the capacity, the instruments of coercion that's necessary, because you cannot be ripping people's resources off. You cannot starve them. You cannot make them work for you for nothing. You cannot take their children and their families and send them off to make wars for you or send them in prisons and do all kinds of horrible things to them without having some instruments of coercion. And this is where you see the emergence of the state organized around private property, and especially private property in the land. And private property in land in this instance, because what we see in terms of these borders that were now created then by these state entities as they were emerging, these borders were now created really simply things that people recognize as defining or land ownership on a broader scale. And what has happened too is where there used to be just these warring tribes in Europe dealing with each other. Now all of Europe that previously prior to this defined themselves in relationship to each other are now defining themselves in relationship to those of us who they have colonized and enslaved. This is where you find the development, consolidation of a sense of sameness that is part of the subjective component of nations, sense of nation and nationalism. And guess what? It's bigger than just Germany or France or Belgium. It's bigger than the Netherlands, etc. It is a common sense of sameness that is only not recognized when these forces who call themselves by these different names, like the French and the British and the etc., are contending with each other for control of the rest of us. But the reality is now you have a common identity, a common sense of sameness that we refer to as the European nation. And with this occurrence, with the emergence of colonialism, you no longer have countries engaged in these casual, accidental relationships with each other around the world. You have the emergence of a world economy. You have changed this material relationship existing among the peoples of the world. You have this mode of production that relies on this extraction of human and material value from those of us who are colonized, that to the benefit of the colonizers. It's one world. There is no Europe existing in isolation from the rest of us. It's one world. It's one world economy that we are dealing with. And that's something that gets recognized more often every time we see struggle in one of these critical places, like you're wondering if the price of gasoline is going to go up in the United States, depending on whether or not there's some struggle of the peoples who are living in what they call the Middle East, or struggle in Nigeria, or struggle in Angola, people taking back our oil and resources. What is going to be the consequence even of this false notion that somehow there's this Green New Deal that's going to bring justice, etc., when the justice that they're talking about is going to require the extraction of all kinds of mineral resources from Congo, where Leopold just 100 years or so ago killed more than 11 million Black people to get rubber for rubber plantations. This is what it is we're dealing with. So you're talking about getting lithium and cobalt and other things for this clean energy that's going to supply Europe. There's enough resources in today. There's enough technological development that's centered in the imperialist countries and the colonial capitalist countries, where the people of the world, the planet Earth, there's no need for hunger. Everybody could be fed today with the resources that's available. But instead, what we see is there's growing competition for these resources. The potential for war for these resources, because you've got this system that was born, that's called, that from colonialism, that we refer today as colonial capitalism, is organized in this fashion, where competition for these resources for the purpose of profit is a dominant driving force that we're looking at. It is this relationship, it is this basis, this economic basis that we're talking about, that is global. It is global. There's no Black question or no white question in that fashion. It is global. Europe is a part of the world, and the world, while Europe has the impression that the world revolves around it, that's a false assumption. Like white people who are from the colonizer nation with this imperial attitude that the world revolves around you, that's a false assumption. And the only reason it looks like that is because Europe, the colonizer, has controlled the world and what the world thinks of itself and thinks of Europe. So part of what's happening and what we engaged in is helping people to regain control of their consciousness by taking science into these struggles that we're involved in. That's why the 140 cities that Uhuru Solidarity Movement is located in is so critical, so important. That's why the existence of the African People's Socialist Party is so important. So I just want to say that your presence here is important, again, and it is a practical, political manifestation of the theory of African internationalism having come to a conclusion about how this whole social system came into being and what it's going to take to get rid of it. And so it is a cruel system. Everybody knows it. Everybody saw the murder, and even white people had an opportunity through watching George Floyd being murdered over and over again through video, because usually white people are simply the subjects of history, and they talk and write about us in a fashion and portray us in a fashion where we are simply objects. And that's how I grew up. Reading at a very early age, I had no way of seeing myself because I was simply an object. What was real was what I was reading, and what was written that I was reading was written by white people.
Uhuru, 5 minutes.
So that's how I came to understand the world. But what has changed, even with the George Floyd murder, is that everybody who saw George Floyd for that 9 minutes and 29 seconds was George Floyd or George Floyd's killers. Because some people did welcome the murder of George Floyd. So I want to say that your significance is profound, and the African People's Socialist Party is engaged in overturning the consequence of colonial capitalism. That's why there is, you will hear from Deputy Chair Onozine Ishatella about the more than 50 economic institutions that we have created. These are not just some institutions that we've created to try to exist side by side within the capitalist system. They are economic institutions that are designed to contend with the colonial capitalist domination and control of our people. That's why recognizing how this thing came into being and the impression, the impact it's had on Africa, we have created an African Socialist International, recognize the centrality of the African Revolution, not the Chicago Revolution, not the Minnesota Revolution, but the African Revolution on overturning capitalism, colonial capitalism, because what the imperialists did was disperse African people all around the globe, and everywhere around the globe, we are suffering, and we are central in so many ways to the continuing functioning of the capitalist social system. We have the ability to bring it down, organize. That's why we have to put on the ground everywhere African people are located, sectors of the advanced detachment of the organization, which is another question that Comrade Jesse Neville was talking about, because if you're gonna make revolution, if you recognize the human factor in transforming the reality that was created by humans, then you have to have an instrument to do that. And the instrument to do that is the Revolutionary Party. And this party is not just any kind of party, it's the party of the African working class. It is the party of the working class. It is the advanced detachment of the working class. It is the general staff of the working class. This general staff created the African People's Solidarity Committee, gave white people an opportunity to engage in genuine class struggle, to join with the rest of the people of the world to fight against the capitalist class. Reparations now. Attack Wall Street. Reparations now. And we're just attacking Wall Street not to find a better way to live within the capitalist system, but to replace it with a different kind of capitalist system, a different kind of social system that requires the destruction of capitalism, which means that the destruction of colonialism, because it can't exist without colonialism. This is what we mean. This is why we created the African Socialist International, the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement. These are practical expressions of African internationalism. It's not some abstract concept we are dealing with. That's why there's an All-African People's Development Empowerment Project mobilizing African people with skills of a certain sort to go into the African world and to engage in helping to development, so counter anti-colonial development for our people. This is who we are. So I just want to say that for the first time, the masses of white people, as a consequence for the first real revolutionary communist organization created by the colonized people ourselves, upon whom the foundation of capitalism rests. Now there's an opportunity to go into motion to overturn the whole system so that you don't have to find yourselves in this unique position as a minority of the human population, fighting to maintain your role on the pedestal of the oppression of the rest of us. This is what we are looking at. This is why you are so important. This is why we have to build Uhuru Solidarity Movement and the Solidarity Movement in general. This is why we have to make Wall Street pay reparations. Uhuru, Uhuru, comrades, vanguard up.
Uhuru, Uhuru Chairman, wow. Wow, I want to give a big round of applause, a standing ovation. That was an incredible presentation. I'm a little speechless, but that's because you said it all. That was incredibly brilliant, Chairman. I just really appreciate and salute, the theory of African internationalism for bringing this to us. And that whole presentation just covered it, start to start to finish how this system came into being, and really gives us the signs to understand and see the world, as it really is um, right now. So I just really appreciate you creating the theory of African internationalism to give us that understanding, and then creating a space for us as white people to participate in overturning this colonial capitalist system, for giving us a responsibility and the opportunity to go out there and to wage the demand for reparations to African people. And it's just so exciting to that we don't have to see ourselves in the city that we're in, but we're part of this whole global revolution, this international African revolution that's led by the African working class and colonized peoples of the world. So I just really, really salute that profound presentation and all the leadership that you give to this international African revolution, and opportunity that we have to be a part of it and to organize. So Uhuru, and salute to you, Chairman. And I just want to, right now, we're going to go into a Q&A discussion, and the opportunity for our comrades on the call to ask questions, for the chairman, for Chairwoman Penny. And this is going to be facilitated by Chair Jesse. So I want to welcome back onto the stage the chairman and Chairwoman Penny and Chair Jesse. Uhuru.
Uhuru. Wow. Well, I just want to give another round of applause for both of those presentations from Chairman Amalia Shatella and Chairwoman Penny Hess. That was absolutely brilliant. I can relate to Ali's sense of speechlessness. It was just mind-blowing. And for anyone who's been watching these presentations, and if you're sitting there and your mind is racing and your head is spinning with just this thunderstorm of incredible revolutionary ideas that you're experiencing today, then I want to encourage you to pick up some of these books. One is Vanguard by Chairman Amalia Shatella, which you can get on Burning Spear Marketplace. Another is An Uneasy Equilibrium. These are the political reports to the 7th Congress and the 6th Congress, and very important texts that you can purchase at Burning Spear Marketplace. And Overturning the Culture of Violence by Chairwoman Penny Hess. Get these books to really engage more with the political theory of African internationalism that the chairman just so brilliantly, Chairman, laid out in such a concise and comprehensive manner. Your whole political theory of African internationalism that turns the world right side up. And I just want to salute those presentations. And before we go to some of the questions and comments that have come in, and we do have people monitoring Zoom, Facebook, and YouTube for comments and questions. So if you're on any of those platforms, please feel free to type in your questions for the chairman or Chairwoman Penny Hess. Before I go to some of the questions that have come in, Chairwoman Penny or Chairman, anything you wanted to say at the top of this discussion? Uhuru.
Uhuru. Well, Uhuru, thank you, Jesse. Chairman, I just really wanted to thank you so much for, hold on one second, I'm supposed to have this here. I wanted to thank you so much for taking this discussion into such a deep place, and for really showing what it means to have challenged the ideas that are accepted as the mainstream, and how profoundly that grips the brains of both the colonizer and the colonized, and how just the science that you have brought to exposing this, and it's electrifying to me. So I remember the organizing conference of the African People's Solidarity Committee almost 45 years ago, and you were going into just the early times, the early days of these ideas, and some of what you're talking about now. And I thought, I was just awestruck. And I just wanted to say one other thing, that just the whole understanding that you put out, that the class question in the whole world is inside of the colonial question, or inside of colonialism, that is just electrifying to begin to understand, and to understand why white workers have never led a struggle that was anti-imperialist and anti-capitalist. So I just wanted you to see if you wanted to say a few things about that, Uhuru.
Uhuru, yeah, like white workers have been enslaved by the philosophy of the relationship, of the kind of mode of production, the basis, the economic base of society, and the leaders of this emerged system that produce philosophy and understanding and explanation of the world based on that. And white workers wouldn't have been enough just to tell white workers that you're better than everybody else. But what happened with the advent of colonial capitalism is that what had previously been simply the extraction of value by a ruling class, or by sectors, by members of a ruling class, and even in the early period of what they characterize as exploration and slavery, the capitalist system began to share the theft of resources with the colonizer. The colonial bosses, the capitalist colonialist ruling class, through the creation of the democratic system, that you know, the revolutions that happened throughout Europe, they called democratic revolutions and what have you, that overthrew feudalism and et cetera. All of these things, what it meant was that there was a democratic now capacity for the colonizers, for all of the white people in Europe and what have you, increasingly to share in the looting process that was happening previously, you know, just by the capitalist class. So now you can get a piece of it by citizenship. This whole democratic right to participate in this process gives you access to it. This is democracy. This is what democracy looks like. Now, white people can get a piece of the action, can join the police department, can shoot a 20-year-old, you know, in Minnesota, you know, can do all of these wonderful things that democracy, I meant that, I'm talking about in terms of women's lib, homosexual lib, or gay rights, all of that stuff on the foundation in recent period of the crisis of the social system, where suddenly you find the rulers who now say that you can have same-sex marriages, you can have the women can fly jets that's bombing people around the world, that can join police departments, you can legally smoke dope. All of this stuff is unifying a colonial population that in the midst of this crisis where it's absolutely necessary to unify the white population because the world is closing in on it. Obviously, if January 6th didn't show anything else, it showed that this crisis for the whole white population is such that, and what we know is that it's a crisis that's stemming from the lack of ability or the declining ability of the colonizers to take all these resources, but more than that, because the money is important, because the jobs are important, because all of those kinds of things are important, but the things that's attached to those things, the idea of the significance of whiteness, the speciality, the chosen people, the notion, you know, that's associated with this whole question of ultimately of white nationality, white nationalism. That's also like a motivating factor that will unite the poorest cracker in the poorest part of the world with a billionaire like Trump. But it wasn't just the poorest cracker, it was also crackers who were not so poor, like one of the heirs to the Publix supermarket chain, that billionaire pumping resources, and there are whole state organizations throughout the United States today that's moving in every way possible to undermine the ability of African people to even have the vote. even under circumstances where most times when you're voting, you got nothing to vote for or nobody to vote for, but they don't even want that to occur. So this is a part of the whole project. And this is why we are so important and you are so important, because you are not being misled by this. You're not being, this sleight of hand is not something that's confusing you. You know that the objective has to be to destroy the colonial pedestal. That means that you're not just fighting in sympathy with African people, though that is often a motivating factor, and it should be a motivating factor because you have benefited from this. But I'm saying also you recognize that the world you want, that you claim to want, where the planet is safe, where there's not a greater likelihood of fighting over the colonial resources all around the world, nuclear conflagration, where you don't have to be afraid of turning on your TV for fear of seeing a 13-year-old child murdered or somebody choked to death, to know about all of this stuff that's happening to African people and oppressed peoples around the world. You want a different world than that. And you've got an opportunity. That's what this gives you. This is what the African People's Socialist Party. This is what the colonized working class under a critical, fundamental, strategic sector of the struggle against colonialism, which means it's the struggle against capitalism, is in the form of its own working class revolutionary party that, as you mentioned, Comrade Penny, just a moment ago, have been working and developing this theory for more than 40 some odd years, consistently, with our eyes on overturning this system and not, we move beyond just wanting to fight against this symptom of a problem with the last murder, with the last assassination that we've seen, but knowing that the problem lies in the system itself, and we've worked so much of it out, and it's still a developing a theory. So the people can also participate in helping to see what it looks like. And I've over answered that question, I know, but Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman, thank you. That was really powerful. I totally unite with all of that. And just really appreciate the discussion so far. And we have 11 minutes left before our lunch break, and people are really sending in the questions. So hopefully we'll be able to get through most of these, but people are really excited by this discussion. And one question I wanted to start off with, Chairman, this is from Chair Tafari Mugeri from the African People's Socialist Party of Occupied Azania tuning in. We're going to be hearing from Chair Tafari on tomorrow's program. And during your presentation, Chairman, Chair Tafari wrote, "Liberation for our people from white power in our lifetime," and then posed this question: should white people concern themselves with class struggle within the African nation, or should they just support Black people in general?
Let me just say, the fundamental contradiction that the world is confronted with is the contradiction between nations. That's the primary thing. This is all the other contradiction that we are talking about that's inferred in the question that Comrade Tafari raised. These are contradictions that require for their existence this other contradiction, the main contradictions, which is the oppression of nations by nations. And so within each oppressed nation and oppressor nations, you will find contradictions there. But the responsibility is to target the main contradiction. That's not to say we ignore the others, but the main contradiction, and that contradiction is the oppression of nations by nations. Now, whites, people who are in what they call South Africa have a responsibility. That's your primary responsibility. Target the main contradiction, not some contradiction that's happening. This is just another excuse to intervene. This is colonialism with a left-wing colonialism by finding another excuse to intervene in the struggle of the colonized instead of taking on the colonizer, which is the fundamental contradiction that we have to deal with. I hope I understood and responded appropriately, Comrade Chair Tafari. Uhuru.
Uhuru, thank you, Chairman. This next question came from a few different people, including Wendy in Oakland, Leah in Minneapolis. Wendy says, one of the most important points that I want to take back to my colleagues and friends as we are struggling to shed some light on what is happening in the world is the challenge that it is not a struggle against racism, but a struggle against colonialism. Can both of you please talk about how the struggle against racism takes people off point? And Leah adds to that, why is it important for us to characterize this struggle as one against colonialism versus against racism?
Well, I'm going to go first, if you don't mind, Comrade Chairwoman.
Please.
We've identified colonialism as a mode of production. We've said that it is, in fact, the economic base of the society that we live in. And what we've come to understand is that the economic base, upon this economic base, there's this superstructure that includes the ideas, the culture even, and legal institutions, political and legal institutions, such as states themselves, such as governments, I should say, and courts and things like this. So the ideas that people are expressing, it respond to this material economic base of how the world as it exists today gets its living. It gets its living through this colonial relationship, and this is the explanation that the dominant sector, the ruling class, gives for why that happens. So racism is simply an ideological foundation of this whole system that we are experiencing, and that mobilizes and justifies the actions that white people, the colonizer, commits against all of the rest of us. That's what that is. But it has its basis in the existence of colonialism itself. I do believe, however, having said that, that you have to become evangelists, and you have to go into the white community, as you are doing, and rescue white people. Rescue those white people who are trapped, because they will die with imperialism, because imperialism must die. The rest of us can't live with it. Rescue them with African internationalism. Inform them so that they can join on the right side of history, and they can desert this vicious ruling class. And I'm not talking about Trump. I'm talking about the whole ruling class, from the Bidens to the Bernies, to the Boris Johnsons and the guy, all of them. Rescue them. And this is that's the responsibility that you are assuming right now. Even when you do make Wall Street pay, you're having to say, look, this is the problem we are confronted with. The reason we having these problems that you are talking about is because we've been living at the benefit of the rest of the peoples, and because these guys here who run Wall Street, etc., are there at the helm of this thing, and that we are stupid for following them. And that if we're going to, because they're welfare stupidity, as compared with the rest of the world. But if there's going to be a future, then you're going to have to join in this struggle against your own ruling class by doing this. Uhuru.
Uhuru, I just unite with what the chairman is saying. And I mean, that's a brilliant answer to this question. And I think we should go on if there's other questions.
Okay. Yes. All right. Thank you, Chairman Omali Shatella. So we have more questions. I don't know if we're going to have time for all of them. We only have 5 minutes left, but there will be more discussion throughout the day. So this is from James, and he says, Uhuru, I would like to know how narratives such as Black community control of the police and defund the police can work together, and or if there are certain contradictions we should be aware of.
Be aware of one thing, that when you talk about the police, you're talking about an instrument of the state. It's an instrument of the state. The state must exist in order to maintain the status quo. That is between the colonizer and the colonizer. So the thing that makes defund the police something that could be acceptable under certain circumstances is the fact that what it does is demythologize, how do you say it? Demystify this whole relationship of the police that's held up as these noble soldiers protecting the rest of us, etc. So it opens a door possibly to extend that discussion beyond that kind of inanity. But the Black community control of police is an anti-colonial demand. Because when we say we control the police, we're talking about there's a state apparatus that exists that's responsible, as I mentioned earlier, for maintaining the status quo. The African people need to negate that state apparatus and have our own power for our own communities, et cetera. That's the decolonizing demand. And that's going to look different ways at different times based on how it can be pursued in different localities and things like that. But ultimately, it opens the door for power, as opposed to opening the door with the assumption that somehow we're going to have the beneficence of whoever it is that funds to defund the state. Who funds the state? you're talking about the state defunding itself. The state, if the state defunds itself, then it has another means in order to dominate and control the rest of the world. And the police is simply an instrument of the state. The state is still there. And it's there in order to maintain colonialism and domination of the peoples around the world and inside the United States itself. Uhuru.
Uhuru.
Let's defund Wall Street.
Yes. Defund Wall Street. Wall Street pay reparations. Uhuru. All right. Thank you, Chairman. And this is a question from Chris in St. Louis, who was one of the comrades who was out on the front lines of the historic campaign that just wrapped up for President Kalambayi and Danette to Charo Masimba. And Chris asks, could you give a few specific examples, this is for both of you, of practical and applicable ways white people can go behind enemy lines to effectively advocate for reparations and an end to the powers of colonialism? Just let me quickly say, Penny, one way it can happen, I will not mention. Go ahead, Penny.
I would say under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party, because organized in the Uhuru Solidarity Movement and the African People's Solidarity Committee, because it's not going to happen as an individual. It's not about that. This is about creating a social movement of white people that force, like the chairman said, our class struggle is in the question of reparations and forcing Wall Street to pay reparations, and also all the social wealth that we have at the expense of African people. That's our job. That has been the job of APSC since its very foundation. And the chairman had to struggle with us to see that, because once we understand what the US is, what parasitic capitalism means in terms of its violence, its vicious stand towards African and oppressed people, we don't want to live there. But this is our assignment. We have to go in there, but we have to be organized. And people can do that today if you're not already a member of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement. And we're going to be talking about how we do that, our programs for doing that, making Wall Street pay reparations, the Reparations Legacy Conference, and building all over the world. We're going to be talking about that throughout this entire conference. Uhuru.
Uhuru. Thank you so much, Chairwoman Penny Hess and Chairman Omali Shatella. That's all the time we have for this period of discussion. There were some questions that hopefully we'll be able to get to later. But I really, really want to appreciate both of these amazing keynote presentations. And I know it's still early, but I'm going to go ahead and call it that this is the best USM convention we've ever had. So thank you so much. This has been incredible. And now I'll turn it back over to our MC extraordinaire, Comrade Ali. Uhuru.
Uhuru. And thank you, Chairman, so much. Uhuru.
Uhuru, what an amazing discussion. Thank you, Chairman Omali Shatella. Thank you, Chairwoman Penny Hess. Thank you, Chair Jesse Neville. I appreciate the comments that were put in from all the comrades watching and the powerful, brilliant responses. So, wow, what a morning. What a morning. That was just absolutely fantastic and a great way to start off day one of our convention. So what we're gonna do right now is we're gonna go ahead and take a 30-minute lunch break. Go ahead and take a 30-minute lunch break, and then we're gonna reconvene at 12:30 p.m. Eastern, 12 o'clock Eastern right now. We'll reconvene at 12:30 p.m. Eastern for cultural performance by African percussionist and Uhuru movement member Karen Smith, as we continue our way on with the program for today. So you don't want to miss that cultural performance. So make sure you get back on at 12:30 p.m. sharp, and we will see you all soon. Uhuru.